Okay, welcome to the design class. This is our first slide lecture for Design 1 for the fall of 2020. And throughout the course, I'll be doing some slide lectures where I talk about either some student artwork or talk about some examples of professional artist artwork that I think relate to the projects that we're talking about. And in this case, um, because this particular unit is kind of new for the structure of my Design 1 class, I don't have any grids of varying textures from my design classes to show as examples. But what I do have is I have some grids that are related to that come from my Drawing 3 class. And the Drawing 3 class is a lot about the students learning to draw in ways where they're not making any kind of imagery, but they have to follow very kind of strict rules, such as in the very first unit, they can only make straight lines, either vertical, horizontal, or 45 degrees. And then in the second unit, they're allowed to add perfect arcs and perfect circular curves. And only by the third unit are they even allowed to add kind of irregular marks like this that we see right here. And one of the things that they do in the Drawing 3 classes, for every unit, they have to make a grid. And these are different from what we're doing in our unit, in part because in their grids, they're allowed to change up the size of the grid elements and the arrangement of them because they can vary the size and organization, and also because these are grids done on much larger pieces of paper, on 22 by 30 pieces of paper. But I felt like that these would be useful for you to see how far you could push your ideas in terms of coming up with varying mark making systems and varying textures. And there are certain moments that really stand out, like this is really quite beautiful, that grouping of textures. And I think one of the things also to note and to look at is how it's often in the layering and interaction of slightly different mark making systems that where the really interesting ideas come out. Um, so here's a different unit. So like last one was from unit 3. I think this one might actually be from unit 4 because it's allowing using white added and gray added chalks. And this is Jadnika's. Here's another one. This is a very nice page. Very nice playing with textures of just different kinds of organizations. And so one of the things you can think about for each of your grids units is also, do they shift or move? Like both in terms of value, to see how like this one goes from kind of mid value to dark mid, and then back to light mids all the way to light, right? Or this one shifts from side to side. But there are other kinds of shifts. The texture could change, or the crispness of the texture can change. Notice how this one both goes from dark to lighter back to dark, but it also changes in the how the texture gets very kind of soft and fuzzy in the center. Now, of course, the materials that they're using here are different. They're using a combination of vine charcoal, black Conte, and graphite, as well as erasing tools. And here's another example. Now in the Drawing 3 class, they do, by unit 4, they start adding color elements. And one of the things I want you to see is just how far you can push these ideas, like coming up with really kind of interesting transparencies that can come out of um, these just this just basic process of making marks and then repeating making marks until it becomes a system and a texture, and then making different kind of arrangements with that, and how far you can take that. I think this one is also Jadnika's. This is from the red unit, where they can only use the red monochromatic unit in Drawing 3. And um, and also look at these grid arrangements as to how the changes of like the difference, how that really draws our attention, right? Can really create hierarchy, but and make us have a sense of like some places to look and other places that we don't look quite as fast or spend as much time on, whereas some places really draw our attention. But also notice that sometimes too much contrast can break up the unity. I think there's a little bit of that here, Like I kind of wish that down here in this bottom row, there had been a few lighter ones, kind of like these, because then these one, two, especially these three, this one, and that one, really kind of stand out as being just so different from the rest, and that kind of breaks up the unity of the grid a little bit. And then finally, let's look at the grids just for a second, one more. Let's think about that issue as well of like, how does the grid kind of organize our attention? How does it create contrast? And are there places where, like to give you another example, would it have been better if we had, let's say, moved this one up to the top, then moved this one over, and then brought that one down to the bottom so that it just would have balanced it a little bit more, moved our eye around from place to place, because the similarity of these four on the bottom kind of slows down our reading a little bit. On this one, you can see that the unity is created by the fact that what's going on in the individual units is quite similar, but then the movement and the hierarchy is created by the changing of shapes of the units and the changing of spacing of the units. A little bit similar here, right? There's a lot of unity to these mark-making systems, but the primary contrast and variety is created by the difference in value, but also the different in orientations and shapes, like some being horizontal, some being close to square, and some being these really stretched out verticals. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. And the last thing I wanted to say was, based off of these grids, they then come up with ideas for larger drawings that they do as a whole. And I really wanted you to see these as well because it can give you an idea of how far you can take a mark-making system. Once you have an idea for a set of marks working as a system, where it can go. Like this one right here is very intense. And then these last three are all by Jadanika. This was actually part of her senior show, but came directly out of her drawing 3 work. And I think these are a great example of someone taking what seemingly a very simple kind of mark making system, and then just by repeating it and thinking about it and trying variations over and over again, coming up with an interesting way for it to work where it really becomes kind of her own language. Okay, that's the end of the lecture. All right, thank you.